man.
I'm glad we're out here today, dude.
You are. Nothing like just going straight out into it.
Yeah.
Well, maybe there's some good symbolism here. I'm gonna read you. This isn't a joke. This is actually just kind of a dialogue I had with my son the other night with August. And I thought this was a pretty cool little, conversation he wanted to have. So I sang him a song, and at the end of the song, going to bed, he heard the word heaven, and he was like, "Hey, what's heaven?" And so I told him, "Hey, it's where we used to live. It's where we're gonna go when we die." And he said, "Jesus will pick you up." And I was like, "Yeah, he'll pick us up." And he said, "No, Jesus will pick you up."
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, he'll pick us all up." And he said, "What about those bones?" And he's talking about some bones that we'd found. We went to Bear Lake, and he saw some bones on the beach and was messing with them. And I was like, "Oh, it was probably a deer." He said, "It died?" Like, "Yeah, and went to heaven." He said, "Jesus will pick up those too?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then he said, "Where is it?" I said, "Well, we can't really see it, but it's a place where everyone's happy." He said, "It's the beach?" And it's like, "It's kind of like the beach, except you don't get owies or feel sad." And he said, "Why not?" And that's his favorite question right now. He says, "Why not?" to everything. I said, "Because it's perfect." And that's, the conversation, but I just thought it was so cool. I remember
awesome.
When he was, one of my favorite things about being a dad is the times that I get to see him really deeply trying to understand something, like pushing his boundary as much as possible to integrate it into his understanding. Yeah, so
that's awesome.
Yeah,
I thought that's a really cool conversation to have with your kid. And I love just knowing August the way that I do. I love just like picturing the look on his face when he's asking it too.
Yeah, it's a very, very curious look.
Yeah.
So the topic I wanted to talk about today is kind of a theme that we had while we were out in the Wind Rivers, at least the one that, anyway. I want to ask you about stillness and the importance of stillness in our lives and in recovery. So just to kind of preface for a second, this last few days it's been really weird for me. We were talking about it in the truck on the way up. I've had what I think is hopefully a reaction to a steroid injection into my neck, because I've got a herniated disc that I'm trying to get to calm down a little bit. But I've been in weird mood swings, really anxious, really depressed, really foggy thinking, shrouded, to the point where I would even classify it as psychosis at least one night, where I was just totally manic and felt like everything was in chaos. I remember a couple nights ago, and even last night, laying down to go to bed at an appropriate time where I would typically be tired, and I was physically tired, but my body just felt like it was buzzing. Like it was a strange sensation, maybe an elevated heart rate and everything like that. And I thought, this is the opposite of stillness in my life, and if I could only have that kind of peace and calm to sedate these symptoms, that would be wonderful. But it wasn't really an option, so just kind of laid there. But anyway, the point being, I know there's other times in life where we're just kind of dealing with that buzzing, let's say, metaphorically, and it's as a consequence of many factors going on around us. And I'm curious what you've noticed, what you've seen as far as the contrast there, in a life of recovery or living wholeheartedly. How did those play with each other, I guess?
That's a great topic today, Chase, that idea of stillness. And it's funny, like in your example, you actually created space to hopefully experience the stillness and couldn't. And so often in recovery work, in the work that I do with my clients, it actually sometimes goes the other way, where they're living lives that are full of chaos. They're wondering about keeping their marriage, they're wondering about overcoming their trauma, they've got all sorts of emotional stuff stirring. It's like a tornado of emotional chaos, and somehow some of my clients find what I call the surrender moment, but it's a place where they experience peace inside of the storm, like the eye inside of that storm.
Yeah.
And they come back to groups, or they come back to one-on-ones and just say, I know that things are crazy in my life right now, but something in me is just still. Something in me is just peaceful. Something in me is just confident. And so often it's connected to a principle called surrender that we talk about, which is not giving up, but giving over everything, that is giving over the outcomes, because I can't control them.
Yeah.
And that idea of finding stillness, man, I'm sorry that you've been experiencing those things too, especially when you're trying to do things right. Like you're trying to go to bed on time, you're trying to relax, you're trying to actually allow yourself some room for stillness, and to have that kind of storm raging, so to speak, is, I know it's emotionally taxing, and it's exasperating. So yeah, this is a good topic to talk about today. I wish I knew the recipe for always finding stillness,
Yeah.
Well, and maybe not the stillness itself, for finding peace.
Yeah.
Right. Stillness is a means towards that peace, I think, actually.
Yeah, so maybe they're not synonymous exactly, but one's kind of a step towards the other, is how you're framing it?
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe they're correlated, but have you listened to or read the book Stillness? What is it? Stillness Is the Key? Is that what it's called?
I haven't, no.
It takes a lot of the thoughts from the Stoics, and it talks about the value of stillness in our lives, and some of the benefits that come from stillness. We were talking up where we were in the Wind Rivers about the 3-day effect. I actually think that the 3-day effect, and again, just to recap on that the research shows that if you get someone out in nature with no technology, on about the 3rd day, there's an actual shift in the way that the brain operates, and the brain waves change, and it decreases anxiety, it decreases depression, and it's kind of associated with that idea of stillness. And the idea is that nature does that for us. So that kind of stillness, or the idea of stillness with meditation, like learning to tame, in a certain sense, the mind. It's weird because with meditation, it's like a two-sided funnel, where on one hand, you don't want to over-concentrate, because if you do, you're not being mindful. You don't want to under-concentrate, because if you do, you're not being mindful. But learning that middle ground of being able to observe and notice whatever it is you're choosing to observe and notice, without getting too stuck on it, while also surrendering everything else that comes your way. That's that kind of sacred space of mindfulness, where people actually often say they experience deeply spiritual experiences, deeply moving experiences, deep levels of peace. And so I'm just kind of rambling right now at the concept of stillness.
Well, I was just thinking about you were talking about the 3-day effect, and we got to do that. You invited me to come to your trip. I don't know if you invited me or not, or I invited myself, but
you were invited.
Made it to the Wind Rivers mountain range with you guys, and I don't even know if it took 3 days for things to kind of settle in differently for me, mentally and emotionally, because and I wonder if that's an average across all people, 3-day effect, or if there's some people it comes in sooner, or some people maybe not at all. But I felt like almost the moment we hit the trailhead, it was like I could breathe easier, and like burdens were being left back in civilization,
Why do you think that is, Chase?
I think maybe part of the nature of my role, and I'm guessing yours too, with the work that we're doing, is that we're kind of always working, and there's some flexibility that comes with being able to manage your own hours and things like that. But at the same time, I mean, I find myself working all the time, like even late into the night, weekends, like early in the morning, along with just the random hours, or the regular hours throughout the week. And I think as a consequence, it's like my mind has always got that in the back burner of like, something probably needs to be done right now.
What else do I need to get to? What else am I missing?
So there's that task list that I'm like, subconsciously managing. And then, more than that, and I is my own family life. So for me, I basically got a week of solitude where Chelsea took care of the kids, and that's atypical. I don't normally just have time to myself like that, especially not for that long. So that's another thing, is like I didn't have to care for anybody, not really. And so those two things were switched off for me, knowing that I don't have service. So
there's no cell service anyway.
Yeah, there's no,
can't do anything.
And it also would seem like you're bastardizing the space somehow by trying to take burdens into it with you, instead of just allowing it to work the miracle that it works.
Yeah. Well, I think to something you're saying, the research actually shows that even 20 minutes, the University of Utah did this, where they had people come just to their arboretum, where they just have a bunch of flowers and plants and trails, and they'd tell people to just turn their phones off for 20 minutes and walk around the arboretum. They start to see those kind of the beginnings of those brainwave results, and actually some of the other benefits to the 3-day effect just after 20 minutes. So it kind of makes sense. And I also think that in your situation, like with the Wind Rivers, I feel the same way. Like that's one of the reasons why I make that trip happen every single year somewhere, is because I want not only myself, but my wife and my kids, my family, to learn to value a different pace of life that doesn't keep them in the rat race. I want them to be able to have to shut off their phones and not be able to connect to to like civilization, and we're left with nature, left with a lot of quiet time, left with a lot of activities that we don't typically get to do, like the hiking and the fishing, and even just sitting around a campfire, like how therapeutic that is in a certain sense. And for me, it does provide. It's almost like a balm, like medicine, like an antidepressant. When being alone in nature takes place. And so I agree with you. As soon as you hit the trailhead, I felt it. It's almost like you get to lay down all those other parts of life that you would choose to do anyway. Like you love your work,
right?
You love your kids, you love, but there's a certain level of pressure of the day in and day out that in a certain sense you're forced to let go of. Like you could worry about it for the next 5 days, but what good is it going to do you? Right?
Exactly.
And so in a certain sense, I actually think it comes back to the principle we're talking about here, which is surrender. You get out into a place like this, and you realize you can't call home. You can't go put your kids to bed. You can't get on your computer and work till 11 at night. You let it go. It's the letting go that I think is part of what brings that stillness, that peace, that 3-day effect.
So you were talking about how some of your guys in recovery will experience stillness as they start to do the work, even though there's still chaos swirling around them, eye of the storm kind of thing. And I was just thinking about one of our friends that loves and supports us, that our former cheese guy, I'll call him, just to not to out him too much, but he sent a message kind of asking about the idea of loneliness, and how essentially he's in the eye of that storm. He's feeling that stillness, but he's also feeling a lot of loneliness, and he's connected with groups and friends and, you know, good support.
He's doing everything right.
He's doing what he can, and is still feeling that that loneliness. And I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts or ideas for a guy like that?
I think so that's a great example, because he is doing so much right. He's 100% bought in on what we teach, connection to God, self, others. He's got a group of men that love him and that he loves, that he's committed to, that he's invested in. He's doing his dailies. He's got good bottom lines. He's actually gone all in on just the idea of a wholehearted life. And yet there's certain circumstances in his life that are causing that deep loneliness. And to me, I think one of the things that I look at in my own life when it comes to like this concept we're talking about is surrender and stillness don't absolve us of the day-to-day problems. What they do is they allow us to put our energies on the things that we can focus on and that we can maybe move the needle with. And then it allows us to be able to let go of the rest because we've done our best. And so it moves from just raw suffering to pain and challenge. It doesn't take away the fact that there's pain and challenge, right? There's the loneliness there, and he's doing everything he can. He's still connecting in the best ways he can to the people that will allow him to. And eventually he may grow into a spot where he might make some different choices to rectify that loneliness. Hopefully he does it in an upstanding, integrous kind of a way. You know. But the more that he focuses on the things that are in his control, the more he can go to bed at night knowing that he's done all he can. And there is some level of peace. Like, think about that. Like, anything you've ever been involved in, even if you've failed or fallen short. You know, I remember in high school, my junior year, we ended up in the state championship for soccer. We'd won the year before. Junior year, we ended up losing. I remember kneeling down on the field at the end of the game, spent, having lost, and kind of desperate and heartbroken, but I knew that I'd given everything that I could to that game. Right? Yeah. Did it suck that we lost? Yeah, but you go to bed on a clear conscience. You go to bed knowing you've done your best. And to me, a big part of recovery work, this is something that I've shifted over the years in my own recovery work, is that the measuring stick for success is no longer the outcome. The measuring stick is the input and the heart that I did it with. And the inputs often lead to winning. But they don't always lead to winning. You know, sometimes the right inputs still end up yielding a hard result or a hard response or challenges and struggles. But I can go to bed at night every night knowing that I've done my best, and the more often I can do that and then give the rest over to God, you know, whether it's my clients or whether it's my own children, I think there's a little element of that peace we were talking about to the eye of the storm, even though we can't control the outcomes. I mean, the stuff you're going through right now with your own neck.
Yeah, right.
Like, you're doing everything you can. The medical treatment you received might have been part of the reason you're feeling the way you do.
Right, yeah.
You're miserable. you know, but what else is there after you've done all you can do?
Yeah.
There's at least the consolation in knowing you've done all you can. You know, and I don't know if that's a good answer or not, Chase. I know that you're standing there going like, F that, like, I don't want to feel terrible, you know.
No,
you know, but
yeah. No, I think that's that pretty much, that's a good response. I appreciate the thoughts.
You know, the other thought about that loneliness you're talking about with cheese guy, with our cheese guy, is that something that I think he's actually pretty good at is that he still is making choice.
Yeah.
Like, his situation isn't completely hopeless. It's the whole Viktor Frankl thing, that circumstances we find ourselves in, some of it might be beyond our control, but the truth is that in any circumstance, there's always some level of choice, even if it's only to adjust the way we're viewing it, something, you know.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself can actually alleviate suffering if we realize that we are making choice. No matter what, we're making choice.
Yeah.
So,
well, I want to give a shout out to him, because I spoke to him over the weekend, and he was really supportive of me and has reached out a couple of times, you know, following up, saying, hey, you'd mentioned that you were not feeling great, and how are things going today? So he's that kind of guy, and I anytime you have a friend like that, you're like, oh, I just want the best for that person.
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So.
Nothing but the best.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, he wants that for you too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So. All right. Well, that's all I got. Also, your jacket looks a little
Good
snug.
thought, Chase. Well, it's because it's your jacket, and I purposely didn't zip it because I knew it would just make me look even more like a sausage. So, it's casing like ready to burst. You know, like when you put it over the fire and it gets hot, it's like, I look like it's almost like I'm going to be like a biscuit can if I zip that puppy up. So.